When you've been a private detective long enough, you stop believing in haunted places. You start believing in people. Their greed, their lies, their weaknesses. Ghosts don't kill. People do. That's what I used to tell myself. Used to. I got the call 2 weeks after New Year's. A woman's voice, brittle and desperate, said she needed help finding her husband, one of the night shift operators at Blackridge Printing Company, a half-dead facility on the outskirts of Jackson, Mississippi. 5 workers had gone missing in the last 6 months, all from the night shift. Police called it runaways. I called it laziness. The woman's name was Eleanor Briggs, and when I met her in her sagging front porch, she looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. She clutched a small grease-stained notebook in her hands, like it was a Bible. "He wrote things down," she said, "before he vanished. He said the place wasn't right anymore." I flipped through the pages. Her husband's handwriting was cramped and frantic. The first thing that caught my eye were the rules. 4 of them, written in thick, uneven pencil. 1. Don't let the machine stop. When they rest, he walks. 2. Don't read the obituaries. They're written before the people die. 3. Don't look in the glass doors of the press. His face waits there. 4. Never retrieve paper that falls beneath the rollers. It belongs to him now. Then she looked me dead in the eyes. They said my husband was seeing things. A boy wrapped in newspaper. Please, find out what happened. It read like the fever dream of an exhausted man, or a superstitious factory worker who'd spent too many nights in a place that smelled like ink, oil, and despair. Still, I took the notebook. 2 days later, I had a new job. Under a fake name, wearing an old pair of coveralls that smelled like oil and defeat. The manager didn't care who I was. The place was desperate for workers. They just told me, keep the presses running and don't wander off. That was all the onboarding I got. Blackridge Printing wasn't what I expected. When I pulled up the next morning, pretending to be the new maintenance hire, the building loomed like a mausoleum. 3 floors of black brick and steel, the windows covered with grime that filtered the daylight into a sickly yellow haze. The sign out front, half-rusted and crooked, still read Blackridge Printing. Established 1937. The parking lot was empty, except for a few dented sedans and a delivery truck that looked older than me. Inside, the air was heavy with the smell of ink and ozone. The machines filled the main floor. Long iron beasts that roared and clattered endlessly, coughing out newspapers in neat, mechanical precision. Workers moved among them like ghosts themselves, quiet, hollow-eyed, avoiding each other's gaze. The foreman, Clayton, a burly man with a nicotine cough, showed me around. "We've been short-staffed," he said, not meeting my eyes. "People don't last long here anymore." "Because of the disappearances?" I asked casually. He flinched, forced a laugh that sounded like gravel. "You know how people talk. Old buildings, accidents, machinery noise. It gets in your head." I nodded, pretending to agree. But even then, I felt something strange. A vibration in the air, not just from the presses. It was deeper, like the whole building was humming under its breath. At lunch, I sat with 2 workers in the break room. The place looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the 80s. Fluorescent lights flickering, a refrigerator growling in the corner. They were nervous, whispering in half-sentences. One of them, a thin man named Ricky, leaned closer. "You hear the rollers at night?" he asked. "They keep spinning even after you shut them down, like someone's still feeding paper through." "Maybe bad wiring," I said. He shook his head. "Or maybe he's back there." "Who?" "The boy," the other worker muttered. "The one that got dragged in. 13 years old. His old man runs this place." I let the silence sit, a ghost story. Every old factory had one. But that night, after my shift, I stayed behind pretending to fix a jammed press. The workers filed out one by one until I was alone. The machines thundered around me, their rhythm strangely hypnotic. Then, for just a moment, the power flickered. The presses slowed. The noise died, and beneath the soft metallic ticking of cooling gears, I heard something else, like the tearing of paper, followed by the slow, deliberate drag of a bare foot across concrete. I turned. At the far end of the floor, between two rows of machines, a sheet of newspaper fluttered to the ground. No draft, no open door. Just that one page unfolding itself across the oily floor, the black ink still wet, as if freshly printed. I picked it up. There was no headline, no text, just the faint outline of a face, smudged and staring, as if the ink had tried to remember someone who wasn't supposed to exist. That was the first time I felt it. Something watching me from behind the presses, just beyond the hum of the machinery. And the worst part? The page in my hand was still warm. The next morning, today's foreman waved me over. "New guy, right? You're on line 2 today. Keep the reels moving, and for God's sake, don't stop the presses." We had a problem once. I nodded, forcing a smirk. "Yeah, I heard the bedtime stories." He didn't smile. "It's not a story." That was all he said before walking off, his boots slapping wetly against the floor. I spent most of the morning pretending to work while watching everything. The machines thundered endlessly, feeding reams of paper through spinning rollers. The air shimmered with heat, ink fumes, thick enough to taste. Above the noise, I caught flashes of conversation. The older workers whispering about him. The Paperface. They said he came when someone stopped the presses. They said he showed you your death before taking you. At noon, I followed a group of workers outside for a smoke. That's when I met Calvin, a young man with a nervous twitch and two bright eyes. "You're new," he said, lighting his cigarette with shaking hands. "You seen him yet?" "Seen who?" I asked, playing dumb. "The boy." He exhaled a shaky breath. "The one who died under the press. Some say he's the terrifying creature now. Some say his father made a deal with whatever came for him. I don't know what's worse, a ghost kid or a father who makes a deal with the devil." I looked back through the grimy windows at the moving presses. The hum almost sounded like breathing again. "You ever see the old man?" "Only once," Calvin said. "He owns this place but rarely comes down from his office. Says the noise hurts his ears." The kid stubbed his cigarette and went back inside. I stayed out a little longer. The sun was bright overhead, but somehow the plant still cast a shadow across the whole lot, long and sharp, like it wanted to reach me. I'd been working at the press for nearly a week when I finally decided to test one of their so-called rules. By then, I'd seen enough of the workers' nervous glances to realize they weren't just superstition drunk. They were living inside a constant current of fear. Every time one of the printing presses coughed, every time the rollers squealed, I could see men flinch as if waiting for something to crawl out of the metal. One guy even whispered a prayer each time he loaded a new roll of paper. The same line, under his breath. "Keep it turning. Keep him sleeping." It gnawed at me. Either these people were trapped in a cycle of madness, or they knew something the rest of the world didn't. So that night, I waited until the supervisor left. It was near midnight, the factory heavy with the smell of ink and solvent. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like a swarm of insects, casting everyone in the same pale, ghostly hue. Only a skeleton crew remained. 3 men and a woman, all gaunt from too many night shifts. Their faces looked carved from ash and cigarette smoke. The presses roared around us, long metal beasts gnashing paper through their teeth, spitting out endless sheets of advertisements and obituaries. I had my hand on the stop switch for press 3. The oldest, the loudest, and according to rumor, his favorite. The rule I was about to break had been drilled into every worker like gospel. 1. Don't let the machines stop. When they rest, he walks. I told myself I was gathering evidence, that I was testing the psychology of fear, not poking at whatever darkness might live in this place. But that was a lie. Truth was, I wanted to see what would happen. I wanted to force the nightmare to show its teeth. I waited for the others to be distracted. Then I reached out and pressed the red button. The machine's growl stuttered twice, then died. The silence that followed wasn't natural. It was too thick, too immediate, like the air itself froze. The paper hung mid-feed, half swallowed. the ink still glistening on its last printed lines. For 3 seconds, no one breathed. Then someone screamed. The woman, Janice, dropped her clipboard and stumbled backward, knocking into a stack of newsprint rolls. "Who stopped it?" she shouted, voice cracking. "Who the hell stopped it?" The others turned to me like a jury reaching a verdict. One man, pale, shaking, ran for the breaker panel. Another fell to his knees and started whispering something over and over. "What's the matter with you people?" I said, keeping my tone steady. "It's just a machine." But even as I said it, I felt it, that change in the air. The smell of ozone, the faint vibration through the concrete floor, as if something huge and hollow were walking below. Janice's eyes widened. "He's awake," she whispered. The man at the breaker slammed his hand against the switch. The press sputtered, coughed, and came back to life. Sheets of paper spitting out too fast, blurring text and images into nonsense. The moment the gears screamed back into motion, the tremor stopped. Silence again, but now it was the silence of relief, not expectation. They all stared at me, like I just set a church on fire. "What the hell was that?" I asked. "A coincidence?" Janice pointed at me with a trembling hand. "You don't stop the machines. Ever. He walks when they rest." "Who?" I pressed. "Who walks?" She didn't answer. None of them did. They just looked at the rolling paper, like it was an altar that needed constant sacrifice. That's when I started thinking about the notebook the missing worker's wife had given me. The one full of those rules. Up until now, I treated them like a collection of cheap fairy tales. But what if they were rituals? The idea slithered into my head and refused to leave. Each rule felt less like protection and more like a commandment written by someone. I wanted proof, not stories, not trembling whispers, not another half-burnt memo about he who walks. Real proof. Tomorrow should have been a day off. The workers clocked out around midnight, leaving the building hollow, except for the endless hum of the presses. Even after the power down, I could still hear them. A low mechanical breathing that lingered in the walls. I told myself it was just the cooling metal contracting, the way old machines sigh when the day's over. By 1:37 a.m., everything should have been dead silent. But it wasn't. One of the presses, number 4, the one they said he favors least, started up on its own. The switch was untouched, the main power breaker still in the off position. Yet the rollers turned slowly, groaning against themselves, pulling blank paper through. It printed nothing, just fed and fed. I took out my phone, hit record, and stepped closer. The sound wasn't quite mechanical anymore. It was almost like whispering, soft, rustling voices folded between the sheets. Every pull of paper brought a syllable. Dry, papery, like breath through teeth. At first, I thought it was wind tunneling through the ducts. Then I heard my name, Arthur Hale. It came from inside the press. I froze. My flashlight trembled over the machine's steel skin, tracing bolts, vents, rollers. All clean, all cold. But the sound kept coming, closer now, layered voices overlapping like a crowd, reading from the same script in 100 different languages. Then the rollers jammed. The motor whined, and in that sliver of stillness, I saw it. Behind the moving paper, where there should have been only shadow, something was standing. A silhouette, tall, wrongly tall, wrapped in paper that moved without wind, folding and unfolding like lungs. Its head was smooth, featureless, except for a single crease running down the center, as if someone had tried to sculpt a human face out of newspaper and failed halfway through. I snapped a photo. The flash went off, white and violent in the dark. When my vision cleared, it was gone. The machine was still again. I checked the photo. A blur of paper and metal, no shape, no figure. But the edges of the frame looked wet, as if the ink itself had bled toward the camera. At 2:14, another press started up on its own. Then another. One by one, all 5 machines began running without operators, feeding endless paper through the dark, each roll chattering softly to itself. It wasn't random, it was rhythmic, like language. I backed toward the office, heart pounding, still recording. My phone mic picked up something under the sound of the presses. Faint, syncopated words, barely audible. Keep us turning. Keep him whole. Keep printing. Something flickered behind the glass door of the press housing. A face. Not human, not exactly. It was as if the reflection itself had twisted. 2 black hollows for eyes, a smudge where the mouth should have been, shifting beneath the surface of the glass. The image was over in the blink of an eye. The air was filled with the smell of scorched paper now. I turned toward the exit, and that's when I noticed the words. Across the wall by the fire exit, letters had appeared, printed in uneven ink strokes that gleamed wetly under the red emergency light. He prints the future. Someone or something had written it seconds ago. I walked outside, shaking, sucking in the cold night air like a drowning man. The factory loomed behind me, dark and watchful. The steady hum of machinery started up again, even though I'd cut the power. I called my client, Eleanor Briggs, from the parking lot. "Did your husband ever say what these rules meant?" I asked. She hesitated. "He said that the presses feed the strange paper creature." I thought he was talking nonsense. Then one night, he came home with ink on his hands, crying, saying he saw a face behind the glass door. I looked down. My own palms were streaked with ink too, thick, black, and still damp. But I hadn't touched the rollers. That's when I heard it again, from inside the factory. A faint hollow voice, echoing through the vents. Not words, just a dry, crackling laughter, like someone tearing pages and trying to speak through them. I sat in my car across the street from the printing plant, chain smoking until the windows fogged over, trying to convince myself that exhaustion had gotten the better of me. Faces in glass, voices in vents, ink that moved like blood. There had to be a logical explanation. Faulty equipment, carbon monoxide leaks, hysteria, something. But logic doesn't leave ink on your palms. As time has shown, the events of that night were only the beginning. The real nightmare awaited me the following Tuesday. Kevin and I were both scheduled to work the night shift today. I arrived a little earlier than necessary and decided to check the archives. Every factory keeps paperwork. Safety records, death logs, insurance forms. Maybe I could find the boy's name. The archives were kept in a dusty corner of the second floor, past a hallway that smelled of mold and old toner. The lights here flickered constantly, humming out of sync with the presses below. I dug through metal drawers until I found it. An old incident report dated December 7th, 2010. Subject, industrial accident. Victim, Daniel Morrow, age 13. Description, fatal injury sustained due to a paper baler malfunctions. Outcome, body retrieved in unrecognizable condition. Daniel Morrow, it was the owner's son. Below the report was a grainy photograph, a blurred image of the press area, soaked in shadow. There was something at the edge of the frame, a figure standing too close to the machine, its shape wrong, limbs too thin, and something pale covering its face. The air grew colder. I could hear the presses below, slowing one by one, until the sound thinned to a shuddering moan. Next to that stack was another envelope. Inside, company records of workers terminated in the last year. I recognized the names, every missing person on my list. But instead of signatures, each file had a printed page stapled to it. An obituary. The most recent file read, Calvin Thompson, age 21. Passed away Tuesday in an industrial accident at Blackridge Printing Company. Calvin, my partner on the night shift. I rushed out of the archive. I needed to find him immediately. A horrifying sight greeted me as I entered third line press. Calvin was trapped between the rollers of press 3, his legs twisted beneath the moving belts. His body convulsed, mouth opening and closing in a voiceless scream as the machine tried to feed him through like paper. The control board sparked. I hit the emergency stop, but the button stuck halfway, as if glued in place. The gears didn't slow, they accelerated. The air filled with the smell of burning ink and iron. And underneath it, something else. Something like wet paper, old and sour. Then I saw it, but only for a brief moment. a face pressed flat against the glass shield of the press. It was made of newsprint, soaked in ink, the letters bleeding together into the faint shape of eyes and a grin. The photo on it was Calvin's. The press digested Calvin with a final, wet-ripping shriek. The rollers, now stained a deep blotchy crimson, slowed to their usual relentless rhythm. The only evidence left was the pervasive, coppery scent of blood now mingling with the ink and ozone. I stood frozen, my hand still pressing the useless emergency stop button. The world had shrunk to the thrumming of the press and the phantom image of Calvin's face. A dry rustling sound came from deep within press 3. It wasn't mechanical. It was the sound of pages being turned in a book made of flesh. Then, a single pristine sheet of paper slid out from the discharge tray. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up. The detective blames himself for the death of an innocent person and calls the police. My face turned pale. How did this page end up in the press which had just crushed a person? How did they expose me? And how do they know my thoughts? When the sirens came, they didn't sound real. They were muffled, as though filtered through paper walls. Maybe that's what the place did. Turned everything soft and hollow, even screams. By the time the police burst through the front doors of the printing plant, I was standing in front of press 3 with my hands shaking, my clothes soaked in sweat. I must have hit the emergency stop a dozen times, but the machine had ignored me until the very last second, as if it had a will of its own. Now it was still, too still. The gears, rollers, and belts were spotless, polished to a gleam. No blood, no scraps of clothing. The area smelled faintly of toner and something antiseptic, like bleach. The first officer, a young guy with buzzed hair and an expression that screamed, "I don't get paid enough for this," stepped forward. "Sir, you said a worker fell into the press?" "Yes," I said. My voice came out hoarse. "Calvin Thompson. I saw him get pulled in." He glanced at the machinery. "Where's the body?" I could feel their skepticism pressing down on me like the humidity. A detective in a gray suit, older, doughy, half asleep, crouched beside the machine, running a gloved hand along the rollers. "Clean as a whistle," he muttered. "You sure he didn't just leave?" "I saw him," I snapped. The machine was still running when I got here. He was caught in it, screaming. Then it stopped and he was gone. The owner, Harlan Morrow, chose that moment to shuffle out of his office. I had no idea that he had been in the building the whole night. He was an old man with sunken eyes, thin voice, hands that trembled when he talked. His shirt was half unbuttoned, his tie hanging loose around his neck. "What's all this noise?" he asked, his voice gravelly and unconcerned. The officer gestured toward me. "This man claims one of your workers, Calvin Thompson, had an accident." Harlan's eyebrows furrowed. "Calvin Thompson? Oh no, son. You've got that wrong. Calvin quit 2 nights ago." The words hit me like a slap. "That's not true," I said. "He was here tonight. I talked to him. I saw him." Harlan gave me a long, tired look. "Mr. Arthur, right? You're new here. Maybe you got mixed up. Calvin's been acting odd lately, paranoid. He came to me, said he couldn't handle the night shifts. Packed up and left." I stared at him, trying to read something. Guilt, fear, anything in his face. But there was nothing there. Just that soft, papery indifference. The police took my statement, walking around the floor, shining flashlights into corners, inspecting machinery that gleamed too brightly under the industrial lights. Every inch of that press room looked like it had been freshly scrubbed, as though someone had spent the entire night sterilizing it. When they finally left, it was just me and Harlan, standing in the middle of the floor. The silence buzzed louder than the machines ever had. "You're making people nervous, Mr. Arthur," he said finally, lighting a cigarette, the flame reflected in his wet eyes. "Talking about disappearances, ghosts, obituaries. It's bad for morale." "I'm talking about a man who's dead," I said. He blew out smoke. "You should get some rest." And that was it. He turned, disappeared back into his office, and shut the door behind him. I stayed another hour, pacing the floor, searching for any proof that I wasn't losing my mind. But it's all in vain. No traces, nothing. It was as if the night had folded in on itself, erased its own evidence. By morning, I gave up. I walked out into the gray dawn, still wearing my work uniform, feeling hollowed out. The streets outside were slick with drizzle. I bought a coffee from the corner stand, the kind that tastes like burnt paper, and tried to calm my hands long enough to light a cigarette. Harlan Marrow had been in his office all night and began telling the officer that Calvin had quit. What if he had killed Calvin and all the other workers? What if he is the real source of evil at Blackridge Printing Company? I needed to figure this out once and for all. The next days, I waited until the rest of the crew shuffled out for lunch, before slipping behind the long corridor that led to Harlan Marrow's office. The floor trembled faintly under my boots, the presses still grinding somewhere below, printing their endless sermons in ink and noise. Through the frosted glass of his office door, I could see his shadow moving, deliberate, methodical. Then, at last, I heard the creak of his chair, the groan of the hinges, and the heavy thud of the door closing behind him as he went downstairs toward the loading bay. Time to move. The door wasn't locked. Another act of arrogance or trust, depending on how you looked at it. The smell inside was peculiar, a mix of stale cigarette smoke, glue, and paper dust. His desk was a mountain of old reports, invoices, and maintenance sheets, stacked so high it looked like it might collapse under its own weight. I started there. At first, it was the usual corporate nonsense. Shift reports, work orders, supply invoices. But deeper down, the tone shifted. Accident reports. They were handwritten. No digital copies, no formal signatures. Just dated entries scrawled in blue ink on yellowing paper. Employee slipped between rollers. Body unrecovered. Misfeed during night shift. Missing personnel 1. Containment incident. Line shut down. The oldest report was dated 1 year ago. The year of the supposed printing accident. The one where the owner's son had died. The paper edges were stiff, but the ink was still sharp, as if rewritten again and again. I thumbed through them until I reached the newest entry, dated only a week ago. The name? Calvin Thompson. The ink was still wet. Next to the stack sat a black leather ledger, its spine cracked with use. Inside were columns of names, workers, most of whom I recognized from time cards and locker tags. Some were crossed out in thin, precise lines of red ink. 12 names in total. Calvin's was the last one. My name, Arthur Hale, was at the bottom. Not crossed out, not yet. A chill rippled through me. I searched the drawers, one stuck halfway. I forced it open with the tip of my pocket knife. Inside were a bundle of letters, tied together with twine. Each envelope was marked in the same looping handwriting. For my boy. The first letter was dated 2 weeks after the son's death. The handwriting trembled, words uneven and desperate. They say the machine took you, but I can hear you whisper in the rollers. You tell me to make it right, to do what it needs. Another, written years later. I did it just as you asked. I felt your hand in mine this time. You smiled through the paper. And another, the ink smeared by what looked like tears. They don't understand what hunger means, you do. You're still here, my boy. You're still printing. The air in the office felt thicker, harder to breathe. I could hear faint whispering through the vent, the rhythmic murmur of machinery, almost human in tone. I backed away, closed the drawer, and forced myself to stay calm. There was a pattern here, a rhythm of death. Each missing employee had worked late the night before, often after volunteering for extra overtime or cutting their breaks short. The reports matched the production logs. Whenever a misfeed or jam occurred, someone vanished within 12 hours. Every disappearance aligned perfectly with a maintenance cycle, right when the owner was alone on site. I snapped a few photos with my phone. As I slipped out, the faint hum of the presses grew louder, vibrating up through the floorboards. It sounded almost like a heartbeat. That evening, I tracked down a temporary hire who'd been listed on a night shift the week Eleanor's husband vanished. A scrawny kid named Ramos who worked odd hours, cleaning ink traps and sorting paper rolls. I found him in the supply corridor, chain smoking by the emergency exit. Ramos, I said. You were on shift the night Briggs went missing. He flinched. Yeah, maybe. Why are you asking? I just need to know what you saw. He hesitated, eyes darting toward the ceiling as if afraid the walls might be listening. You don't want to know what I saw. I do, I said, pulling out my badge, letting the glint of metal reassure him that I wasn't just another worker. Private investigation off the books. Help me out. He licked his lips, stared down at his shoes. The boss was here that night. Morrow. He wasn't supposed to be. Came in around 1, maybe 2 in the morning. Said there was a jam in the baler. Told me to go home early. I leaned closer. And did you? He nodded, voice trembling. Yeah, but before I left, I heard this noise, like metal grinding real deep, then something else like paper ripping but slower. And he swallowed hard. Someone was crying. Crying. Sounded like a man, or maybe not, like it was coming through the machines. Ramos flicked his cigarette into the dark and started backing away. I ain't coming back here, man. This place eats people. Don't say I didn't warn you. He left me standing alone under the flickering fluorescent lights, the stale air thick with ink dust. When I returned to the floor next day, the mood had shifted. Workers avoided eye contact. Conversations died when I walked past. Someone had told Mr. Morrow I'd been snooping. He found me near the press, the same one that had swallowed Calvin whole. His smile was thin, polite, but there was something hollow behind it. Mr. Arthur, he said, his voice smooth as newsprint. You've been asking a lot of questions. Just doing my job, I said. Of course. He adjusted his tie, eyes glinting under the harsh lights. You're thorough. I respect that, which is why I'd like you to stay after tonight's shift. There's a problem in the lower bay. I could use someone with your attention to detail. I forced a smile. Sure thing, boss. His grin widened. Good man. Don't wander off before I call for you. Some places in this plant aren't safe alone. He turned and walked away, his shoes scraping softly against the ink-stained concrete. I watched him vanish into the stairwell. The presses hummed low and steady around me, their rhythm matching the pulse hammering in my ears. Something was waiting below, beneath the whir of machinery and the reek of hot paper. Something that wanted to be fed. And Harlan Morrow wanted me to deliver myself to it. It was late in the evening when I descended the metal stairs into the lower bay, the place workers half-jokingly called the pit. Down here, the smell was heavier. A sour mix of ink, metal oil, and paper dust that never seemed to settle. The machines were silent now, stripped of their roaring rhythm. That silence felt wrong. The building needed its noise like lungs needed air. I stopped by the shredder, the industrial beast with its teeth of steel, its chute wide enough for a grown man. I turned on my recorder. I'm in the lower bay. I have reason to believe the owner. I heard footsteps behind me, slow, dragging, deliberate. Mr. Hale, said a voice from the doorway. Harlan stood there, his face pale under the flickering light, a grease-stained coat buttoned up to his neck. His eyes shone with a manic brightness that made my stomach turn. You invited me, I said. Told you needed my help. I did, Harlan said, descending the steps one by one. But you've gone too far to live, detective. I straightened, the wrench in my left hand. You made up a legend about this thing. The Paperface. His lips quivered, forming something between a smile and a grimace. That's not a legend. You call it a thing, but it's my boy. He stepped closer. The smell of ink and rot rolled off him. I heard what happened, I said carefully. Your son, the accident. The press pulled him in. Not an accident, he snapped. His voice cracked like tearing paper. The machines took him because they were hungry. They always were. They wanted blood for paper, breath for print. But they gave him back to me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded scrap of newsprint. It trembled in his shaking hand. He came back through the pages. He speaks to me through the words. He tells me who to feed next. I stared at the note, recognizing the same style of handwriting from the rules notebook. My pulse quickened. "You killed them," I said quietly. "The missing workers. You threw them into the baler." His eyes watered. "It wasn't killing, it was binding." He said every body keeps him whole. The ink is his blood, the paper his skin. I backed away as Harlan moved closer. Behind him, the printing presses roared to life. All of them at once. The machines thundered, rollers spinning, spitting sheets across the floor. The walls shook with the rhythm of a massive beating heart. "I can hear him now," Harlan whispered, clutching the newspaper to his chest. "He's telling me you don't belong here, that you saw too much." He lunged. I dodged, the wrench catching his shoulder. He screamed and stumbled into the press console, slamming the activation lever. With a shriek, the nearest machine opened like a mouth. Its rollers turning, its gears whining, paper whipping through faster than the eye could follow. I realized then, the sound wasn't mechanical anymore. A strange voice poured through the pipes, calm, layered like an echo across time. "He obeyed me, now you will too." The air filled with drifting paper, faces printed across each page, blurred, distorted, screaming silently. The missing workers, their features pressed flat and lifeless in ink. Harlan turned to me, tears streaking down his face. "He needs you now, Mr. Hale. He says you'll take my place." He pressed a button on the control panel. The shriek of the shredder tore through the factory, a grinding metallic scream that drowned out every thought. The floor trembled beneath me as I stumbled backward, my boots slipping on a carpet of shredded paper and half-dried ink. Harlan Morrow stood at the far end of the press floor, his face bathed in the pulsing red light of the emergency lamps. His eyes gleamed like wet glass, and his mouth twisted into something between a grin and a grimace. Behind him, the shredder churned, an open metal maw, spinning knives gleaming under the strobe of flickering bulbs. "You don't understand," he shouted over the machine's roar. "He's hungry. The press must feed." He lunged at me again, swinging a length of steel pipe. I caught it on the wrench, sparks flying where the metal clashed. The impact sent pain shooting up my arm, but adrenaline had long since replaced fear. "You killed them," I yelled, forcing him back toward the spinning blades. "All of them. You fed your people to this thing." His voice cracked with a laugh. "I gave them purpose. Paper remembers. Hale, every word, every face. He keeps them all. He makes them live forever." I ducked another swing and drove my shoulder into his chest. The old man staggered, nearly losing his footing. A stray newspaper whipped across his face, and for a second, the headline burned into my mind. "Private detective kills owner of Blackridge Printing Company. His body never found." My stomach twisted. The ink wasn't dry, it was bleeding. Harlan screamed, grabbed me by the coat, and dragged me toward the shredder. "He wants you next. You've seen his face. Now you belong to him." The machine's roar filled my ears. I could feel the heat radiating from its blades, the wind from their spin pulling at my clothes. The air stank of oil, metal, and something faintly human. A sickly sweet rot that clung to my throat. "Listen to him," Harlan shouted. "He's calling you." And for a terrible second, I did hear it. A whisper threaded through the roar, 100 voices woven together like crumpled paper being smoothed out. "Arthur Hale, Arthur Hale, feed him." The voices came from the walls, from the vents, from the pages themselves. Newspapers fluttered across the floor like dying birds, each one showing my face. Smudged, twisted, fading. Harlan's grip tightened. "He's chosen you." I twisted, fought, and drove the wrench into his ribs. He screamed, his hands loosening just enough for me to shove him backward. He stumbled, arms flailing, and fell into the shredder. The machine shrieked, metal grinding against bone. A spray of blood splattered across the floor, sizzling where it landed. The factory fell silent, the hum of the presses dying one by one, until only the slow wheezing spin of the shredder remained. Then came the rustle. From the shadowed corner of the floor, the Paperface emerged. He was taller than I'd imagined, impossibly thin, wrapped in layers of fluttering sheets that moved as if breathing. His limbs bent wrong, folding and unfurling like the arms of a marionette. And his head was a ball of newspapers crumpled and layered over a skull that might once have been human. Pages peeled away with every movement, revealing flashes of faces beneath. The missing workers, their mouths open in silent screams. He leaned close enough for me to smell the ink, sharp and chemical, masking something rancid beneath. A fresh page fluttered across his face, blank for an instant, before words began to print themselves across it in dripping black letters. "The hunger doesn't stop." Another line appeared beneath it, the letters forming as if pressed by invisible hands. "Now it's your turn to feed me." The air filled with the sound of pages flapping, 1,000 whispers layered into one. I backed away, but the walls seemed to pulse closer, lined with newspapers that all bore my face now. I stumbled toward the exit. The lights flickered wildly, machines groaning awake, as though the building itself had a heartbeat. The whisper followed me through the hallway, soft, persuasive, like a thought blooming in my mind. "You saw how they lived. You saw what they were. They deserve it. Satisfy me, Arthur Hale. Feed me again." By the time I burst through the loading bay doors, dawn had started to rise. Pale and colorless, the world outside cold and silent. I ran until the factory was a shrinking shadow behind me. They tell you the world goes quiet after you flee a place where something wants to eat you. That's the lie I lived on the run. The first weeks after I left Harlan's factory, I slept like a man who'd finally exhaled. Not because I was safe, but because exhaustion is a kind of anesthesia. It didn't last long. The shredder's sound found me first. It comes like a memory that's been rewired into the bones. The sound is never alone. It arrives with the voice. At first, the voice was a line, a suggestion that sounded like feedback through a broken speaker. "Satisfy my hunger." At other times, it was a choir of presses cycling, all unanimous. "Kill them." It is always the same cadence, a soft imperative that refuses question. The phrasing changes, but the appetite behind it never does. It knows when my jaw tightens, when my eyes snag on the wrong face in a crowd. I learned to test myself. I would stand at crosswalks and count heartbeats until the urge passed. I read aloud from telephone books, news articles, and grocery lists to drown the whisper in other syllables. I would go to the hardware store, run my hands across wrenches and crowbars to remind myself they solve locks and stuck drains, not lives. Sometimes I did well. Sometimes I woke with my palms torn and my throat raw from whispering words into a pillow, until the sun leaked in and the compulsion receded. People noticed. A client once asked if I'd been in a fight. The hollow under my eye, the way my laugh came out wrong. My sister called and asked if I was drinking. I wanted to tell them I was being haunted by the sound of metal chewing paper, and by a voice that tasted like old ink. But how do you explain an evil machine that lives in your head? He was cheating on his wife. He deserves it. A man in a bar, boasting to his friends. She steals from the register. She's trash. Feed her to the hunger. A waitress with quick, nervous hands. That politician on TV, lying through his teeth. Pulp him. His lies would be such sweet sustenance. I see them all in the shredder. I feel the satisfaction of the grind, the quiet that follows a feeding. The Paperface hunger is a void, and it's using my cynicism, my detective's knowledge of human filth, as a filter. It only shows me the ones my own dark heart can justify. I have tried help. I sat across from professionals who had the right look and the wrong certainties. Some called it trauma, others called it stress. None of them could hear the shredder that naps beneath my ribs, the machine that purrs when I lay my head on the pillow. Medication blunted the edges, but never the voice's insistence. The noise became quieter, then louder, like a press throttled back, and then slammed forward. I stopped telling people everything. Secrecy is a shelter and also a feed. It keeps me alive and it keeps the voice company. But I live with the sound. I live with the memory of Harlan's hands and the wet metallic scent. I live with the knowledge that the thing we fed did not die with him. It learned. It learned the texture of my consent and how to ask for it more prettily. It found the easiest place to plant itself. A corner of my decision-making, a hairline crack in my certainty. When the night comes, I lock the doors. I check the shutters. I keep a light on until the sky forgets the shape of stars. I tell myself the shredder is a noise that belongs to a building. The voice is a hallucination. I tell myself that I am stubborn and alive. I tell myself I will not be the instrument of that hunger. Somewhere, a machine chews paper into useless threads, and for a moment, the noise is indistinguishable from the voice. The sentence loops in my head, the one that's always been the problem. Satisfy my hunger, kill them, they deserve it. I listen to it like a man who has learned every single word of a prayer he no longer believes in. I don't know how long I can keep that refusal. The voice, it's getting louder every day. I'm afraid of doing something terrible and becoming the evil I fought against.